The Interloper is a game developed by PureDX23 and Mush Potato. The game is only a demo of what they have planned to make, which just makes me so happy to hear because this game was an absolute joy to play. The premise is that you are piloting a drone called the Quadbot Z through an abandoned research station in Saturn's orbit. Because this is a drone which we are piloting from Earth, the live feed is extremely noisy, with limited sight and a really grainy 1-bit feedback look to it. I think the first thing to note is that the game looks absolutely gorgeous. The fact that it manages to convey how grainy the footage of this feed is while still keeping absolute clarity over important objects such as our character, items, walls, and enemies, and it's doing all of this with only 2 colors, is absolutely incredible. I think a part of what makes this all work so well is the limited visual range. The way that you can't see what's behind objects until you move around them looks just as visually cohesive as you would find in a game using regular lighting engines for these kind of line-of-sight mechanics. After some exploring, you get a weapon to fight back against this station's security. These are the main enemies of this demo. Your limited line of sight does sometimes let them get the drop on you, but the shock grenades you are equipped with can be bounced off of walls, forcing combat to take a more slow and methodical approach. In general, this game's whole atmosphere, coupled with the lack of any kind of audio, makes you really take your time and assess your surroundings. I think that the lack of sound of any kind really works for this game. It's not only a lack of music, there are no menu sounds, no sounds when you are recovering health at a charging station, no sounds for enemies shooting at you, and no sounds for the Quadbot shooting at enemies. I think that this is supposed to represent the very loose contact you have with the Quadbot Z from all the way back on Earth. But I think that it works to create tension, because in situations where visibility is limited, we often rely on our sense of hearing to detect danger, meaning that if something were to sneak up on us, we would have no way of knowing until it was in our line of sight. All of this to say, I have to imagine that a full release of the game will include some kind of stalker enemy, or at least some kind of mobile enemy. I think something like that would shake up the gameplay and force a more methodical player such as myself to really panic in that kind of situation. I think that this demo shows a lot of promise, and I would definitely recommend you check it out for yourself. I left out all the story details so that people could find them themselves. It's not an insane amount because it's just a demo, but it's definitely worth having a look at. Shrieky Holes is a game developed by, I'm gonna say this completely wrong, Spawns, SHPWNS. I can only describe this game as a tactical, turn-based ghost defense game. The premise is that you are a ghost who needs to protect these 5 skulls from various different intruders who will come into your manor. The game will go between your turn and the enemy's turn on this Cluedo-style chessboard. Every turn you can move up to 8 spaces and use a shriek attack once. Your various enemies will use their turns to move to collect the 5 skulls around your manor, or, if you are within their movement range, to attack you. I really like how this game stacks the odds against you in a few ways. Your enemies will almost always outnumber you, and they can move around in different directions to go for multiple skulls at once, splitting your focus. Even if they aren't all spread out, if multiple of them are near you on their turn, they can take out your health bar pretty quickly, meaning you have to be really careful about when you choose to end your turn and where you choose to end your turn. To balance this, the game gives you several advantages, which are only advantages if you use them wisely. For example, you can move through walls, meaning that you can position yourself before or after an attack to keep out of harm's way. And movement can be divided into before and after an attack. This makes for a playstyle where you pop out at your enemies and then fade back into the wall that you came from, like you would expect from a ghost in a haunted house. Your shriek attack is also quite powerful if you're smart about using it. It has this range of effect where you can hit multiple targets, meaning that you can take on groups if you're careful. And the shriek has the added effect of causing enemies to panic. Once they are hit by it, they will then spend their next turn running in the opposite direction from you. I do really like this design philosophy of giving you a chance to wipe the floor with your enemies, but only if you're smart about how you do it. The game isn't too long, it's only 4 levels, and there's a lot that stays the same about those 4 levels. The map layout is the same, the skulls are always in the same location, and enemies always start off in the same hallway. Your character never changes or improves their abilities, but I think that there is a really solid gameplay loop in this game which has a lot of room for exploration of new mechanics and maybe some more incentive to protect as many of the skulls as possible. I do also appreciate that this is one of the only games from this jam which took the word shock to mean something other than electricity. This game is pretty solid, and I do hope it's iterated upon in the future. I really recommend you check this one out. Spark Protocol is a game developed by Nakoda Pixel with music by Donut Droid. The game is quite simple in concept. You play as this adorable little robot named Spark, who just wants to escape this laboratory. Make it through 7 levels, and you're free to go. What separates this platformer apart from other platformers is that you can't jump. Instead, you have an omnidirectional dash, which, now that I say it out loud, is just a fancy way to jump. However, this dash is different to the type of dash that you would find in other platformers. Because you don't have the ability to jump, it's less of a correction tool and more of a basic function of how you navigate the world. It also has a lot of charges. You can hold 5 of them at any time, but with how quickly you recharge, you can really use it about a dozen times without any drawback, and even then, you can still use it pretty quickly. This dash also functions as a form of attack and defense. You can use it to attack any security bots who may try to stop you. And I think that while you dash, you are invincible to bullets, but not lasers. I'm not completely sure, but it definitely saved my hide more than a few times, only for me to end up dying a few moments later anyway. I think that the way that this dash is designed encourages players to take risks and try and progress through sections of a level at a faster pace than would necessarily be wise. And there's definitely a certain satisfaction to pulling off a plan which you had absolutely no guarantee of succeeding, especially because this game is actually pretty difficult. The difficulty ramps up pretty quickly over 7 levels, and the levels don't have checkpoints, meaning that if you die right at the end of one of the later levels, you lose a decent chunk of progress. At the same time, the game doesn't slow down even after dying multiple times, and that lends to the feeling that you're slowly improving at the levels. Especially because there are multiple ways to tackle every level. I ignored about a third of level 7's level design because I understood the mechanics and where I could sneak through, and I thought that that was really cool. I also have to say, the music and visuals for this game are simply fantastic. Part of why I love this 1-bit jam in general is because I think 1-bit lends itself very well to creating distinct and stylish visuals, and I think that this game is no exception. Once you've completed all 7 levels, you come to this area outside the facility where you have to push your dash feature to the limit to reach this platform that is way above you. Once you do, you get this very sweet ending message from the developer. I really can't recommend this game enough. Despite all the times I died, it was really fun, and there's a secret bonus level that I couldn't find, so that's reason enough for both me and you to give this game another go. Zip Zap is a game developed by T-Bleezy. It's a fast-paced platformer where you jump into enemies to damage them, roll around loop-de-loops, and hit off bumpers to maintain momentum. I'm sure most people who've played a Sonic the Hedgehog game in their life will recognize the primary inspiration for this game, and this is an inspiration that the developers have acknowledged in the game's description. I really do enjoy seeing a smaller developer or development team creating this kind of project, taking a classic gameplay formula for a series which is defunct or has shifted focus, and putting their own spin on the gameplay, visuals, narrative, or any other number of things. I would argue that that's how we got Stardew Valley, as an adaptation of Harvest Moon, and I would encourage anyone who is stuck for ideas on what kind of project to create to make something like this. It is, however, apparent that this game takes significant inspiration from the classic Sonic games. What spin do they put on the concept of Sonic to distinguish themselves? I think that firstly, visually, this game takes full advantage of its 1-bit art style and the strengths of this art style to create a visual clarity which remains even when your character is traveling at high speeds. I think that the design of both the enemies and our protagonist in particular have this sort of glow to them which really helps them stand out amongst the environments. The music also has this almost dingy feeling to it that I think adds a sense of urgency to the gameplay. It really makes you feel like you gotta go fast. Gameplay-wise, there are a few things which sets this game apart from its inspiration. For one, it's harder to build momentum in this game without any boosters or bounce pad to aid you. Once you do get going, it's pretty easy to keep momentum as long as you don't meet face to face with walls or a spike pit, but the character takes just a split second to start moving once you press the movement key, which makes momentum feel a little bit more earned, but can be slightly frustrating during the slower platforming sections of the game. Health also works differently in this game, and serves to make the gameplay just a bit more challenging. You have this charge meter on the side of the screen, which builds up when you collect these little lightning bolts or when you're moving at high speeds. This meter functions as your health bar. When you run into an enemy, you lose about half of this, and when you run into a spike pit, you lose all of it. You can also expend half your health for this AoE effect, giving the player a way to gamble their health, which I am always a fan of. I do think the fact that you run past most of the enemies, and the fact that it takes away almost all of your health in a game where you're only ever 2 hits away from death, does lower the incentive to use the zap attack, but I do really like the design philosophy about this attack. The game is 1 level long, with 3 hidden fuses to collect. I think that there is definitely room for some more expansion and more levels, maybe in the same zone using the same assets, with a higher density of enemies, so that there is more of an incentive to use the zap, and more high momentum sections, because that always gets the dopamine receptors firing. If you enjoy speedrunning, or just short games in general, you should definitely give this a try. Dynamo Frank is a game by Fetmo, Demuri, and Data Goblin. It's an isometric puzzle game where you take on the role of one of the classic gothic horror icons trying to escape a lab. Before I talk about anything else in this game, I just want to point out that the game lets you select which song you want to listen to while playing. I really like this feature, and I think that more games that do not have designated music for certain areas should take absolute full advantage of this feature. As the titular Frank, you have 2 main abilities at your disposal. You can scare humans, which is used to crowd control these scientists and get them to stand on switches. You also have the ability to collect and administer electric charges. You can collect these from light bulbs in the lab, and they can be used on other light bulbs which power various appliances in the lab. They can also be used to shock scientists into standing still if you need them in a specific spot. Lastly, there are guards which will shoot you on sight. I think that this is one aspect of the game I wish was a little bit more fleshed out. The guards never posed much threat to me, and I always felt that I could just move around them. I think that maybe if you were forced to interact with them more, or if there were more of them in the levels, they would feel a little bit vestigial. But as is, it's not too big of an issue. As with many of the games I cover, I love the visuals for this game. But one thing I particularly like about the visuals is the floor of the levels and how it contrasts with the area outside the lab. I think it can be hard sometimes to distinguish between spaces in a 1-bit art style beyond putting a wall or a floor or some other barrier between them, but I think that creating a pattern, even if it's just a few dots, can lend to contrasting 2 different areas on the same axis. This is used to great effect, contrasting both the outside from the inside, but also the different areas on the inside which can't be accessed directly from one another. The game sports 5 levels, all of which I really enjoyed. I thought that the 5th level in particular was really clever. The setup is that you have to scare this scientist onto this button to reach a door that you can't move fast enough to get to. I won't spoil the solution, but I thought it was really cool. At the end, you come to the outside of the lab and you have to turn on these 3 bulbs to get the ending, which I will leave for you to watch yourself. If you enjoy puzzle games in any way, I strongly recommend that you give this game a try. Zip Cross is a game developed by Spielpopik23. The game is a level-based platformer. Unlike Zip Zap, it borrows a lot more from the Mario school of platforming, although it does have some light speedrunning elements to it. You play as this guy, no name or motivation given, and you just gotta get to the end of each level. Once you do so, you win. The game is very straightforward in what it is, and it doesn't waste time pretending to be something that it's not. You have a very simple kit of moves. You can move, sprint, jump, attach to zip lines, and charge up to release a shock to destroy obstacles, and these panels which keep the exit doors locked. Once again, I think that this game is a good example of how to take advantage of a 1-bit art style. The particle effects in this game create some depth to the visuals, and the way that the objects in the background are contrasted with the platforms and interactable objects by not having a solid outline and only being defined in patterns is very clever, and makes the whole experience much more visually engaging. The platforming in this game is quite enjoyable, and I think that the sense of momentum the character has, along with the floatiness of this character, lends quite well to the slower pace of some of the platforming. Although where Zip Zap has slower acceleration, this game has slower deceleration, which can sometimes fail you on some of the moments of precision platforming. One thing about this game I absolutely have to mention is the collision on the platforms. There are never any issues in terms of the clipping or phasing through any of the blocks. Rather, there are several points where the collision of certain walls was not extended far enough up, letting you do this. I don't hate this by any means. I think it's really cool, and I'm always a fan of platforming sections which take an open approach to how their players explore and move through the space. But I can only assume this was not the developers' intentions when it came to navigating the world they created, and sometimes this lack of collision lets you skip full areas of levels. I had fun exploiting this while I played, but I imagine that the developers would probably want to implement some changes to this if they were going to go any further with Zip Cross. Eventually, we reach the end of the 7 or so levels, and true to the form of Zip Cross, we get this absolute banger of a you win screen. If you love classic platformers, I would highly recommend you give this a try. And there you have it, another 3 games about shock. Very quickly, I want to recommend one last game that is particularly short. It's called 3:46 AM. It's from the same jam, and it was absolutely another one of my favorites from this jam, but there isn't really enough content to make a single segment out of one of these without spoiling the play value, so I think that you should just go check it out for yourself. And if you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe, and if you have any thoughts on any of these games, be sure to leave a comment. I love hearing what other people think about these kinds of projects. Bye bye.